So we are back with the information exchange. 2 out of the 4 players here, but we're going to go strong. I think I would love to start with a HIMSS recap from you, Brendan. I was pretty busy myself on the other side of the country. Didn't make it out to HIMSS. Saw some news, but I would love to hear your take. What happened?
Yeah, quite a lot. Have you been to HIMSS before? I don't know if we've ever synced on this.
Yeah, so I went when I was with Epic, I think about 2 years into Epic, and I was in the basement doing an interop showcase or whatever it was called, where I ran the same script, I think 45 times in 2 days. And so that was a very repetitive, not great experience just in terms of the personal needing to do the job there, but it was fun and Vegas was fun. But it would be a very different experience now. And I've been able to go to Vive since then and things like that, but I haven't been back since that one showcase.
You go to Vegas too many times and you're in the Venetian over and over and over again. Just
Right.
blurs the years. And no, booth working is different than sort of rogue agent parachuting in and having 12 meetings a day, which is the way that we typically operate when we go to health and Vive. You can more easily find ROI for certain companies if you're setting up meetings, going and ad hoc meeting people versus a booth that it really is 6 figures or above as soon as you have something hanging from the ceiling. Our colleague Brad and I, we went out, had a ton of great meetings. Overall, felt a little smaller. Since the sale of HIMSS to Informa a couple of years ago, we've seen a contraction from 35,000 or whatever it is to 30. And I feel like it maybe trended down. Like the booths were a little bit more spread out. It felt more spacious in terms of the throughways and stuff like that. There's all the requisite weirdness in terms of people going a little too far with marketing and putting stuff out there. There was one group that had like a robot hand on their head that was like going like this. That was probably the highlight of weirdness. But it was good. It was very productive. A lot of sentiment was, this is way better than Vive, which, you don't
Really?
expect. They had a cat pit instead of a dog pit. So Vive typically has all these puppies and you can go and play with, and they had kittens. And so I didn't get a chance to do that, but it seemed pretty cool. And they're trying to be competitive with Vive in that regard. Are you more of a cat or a dog person?
I'm definitely a dog person, but
Yeah.
I
Kittens
would
are
pet
still,
a cat.
yeah, kittens are cute, fluffy, anything to deal with the hangover of being in Vegas. But beyond that, what do we see? I mean, AI, all the things, right? Epic. If you look at all the press release that went through CNBC and Modern Healthcare, it was just all Art and Penny and Emmy for Epic, their AI announcements. We had consumer-facing AI from Microsoft, which is interesting, right? Like that's not particularly their slant versus some of these other companies, but they released in partnership with HealthX their patient access and chatbot experience. So AI headlined, as you might expect.
Yeah, I mean, I think we see that universally all the time at this point, but that's what I was seeing, between meetings, checking on news, I guess on Epic, Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, Athena Health, everyone had, here's our take on AI. Epic came out with Agent Factory. So I think we see the shift from, just general like chatbot or LLM AI to agentic AI is definitely becoming prevalent. I did put a post on LinkedIn about this, but I think there's a big difference between what you can show at a HIMSS showcase when you have a very clean data environment and a simple workflow to say, wow, look at what this can do, versus AI in the real world, especially with health system data where we know, the pipes might be there, interoperability might be working in terms of connecting from place to place, but there's a lot of bad data out there. The utilization of that data is what's becoming important. I think, especially with agentic use, being able to have a provider just type in something from a prompt and be able to pull up the record that they're concerned with. We need to have a lot of good data classification, normalization, cleansing of the data that comes in. And so I guess I'm wondering, was there any level deeper? I saw this, starting on the caregiver team at Epic, we were obsessed with raw number record exchange first, and then it slid towards how are we actually using the data once it got there. Now with AI, do you see that start to shift or not yet, where it's AI's here, but now how do we actually start to use it?
Totally. Brad and I had maybe 4 straight conversations where some slant of it was data normalization, augmentation, cleanliness, and sometimes that was using an LLM, off the shelf, commercial off the shelf LLM, like OpenAI or something. But then other tools using machine learning or their own models or whatever it might be to be more healthcare specific and to get to a higher accuracy rate. And so certainly as we have, care quality and TEFCA and information blocking, all these things mean that data movement is much more accessible. The cleaning of it, the parsing of it from those data sources and others like Fax, there's a ton of infrastructural companies vying to make their play in that space. And so certainly prevalent. I think the other thing, like the off the radar announcement that I can't even find on the internet right now is at the Epic booth, looking at with the patient at the heart, the health grid products, right? They're network-based products.
Mm-hmm.
There was the addition of a new one, which I'd never seen before, which is Willow Pharmacy Network. And it was something around like specialty pharmacy workflows to start, but much like Epic Payer Platform isn't taking on clearinghouse roles, but the clinical data exchange. So an adjacent payer functionality that gives them a beachhead to sell into payers, that gives them a beachhead to potentially go do eligibility and claims down the line. That business strategy that is now being applied to pharmacies where they already have a system of record they can sell, Willow Ambulatory, and potentially they could go, after they build this network product and get deployment, perhaps they can go do e-prescriptions, perhaps they can do other workflows and take on short scripts. Is something that I posited in an article a couple of years ago, but is interesting to see play out in some fashion. And so I'll be excited when it's actually on the website, when I can see it anywhere else, we can learn more details. But that was my beneath the AI radar announcement.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think you're right. I didn't see news around that. So you brought it up as kind of a networking type side product. So are they actually thinking of the movement of data? So you talked about analogous to SureScripts, or is it more the workflow around specialty medication management? So prior authorization, things like that.
It was distinctly in the health grid. Now I keep calling it health grid because it's a better name than with the patient at the heart, but with the patient at the heart products, Epic Payer Platform, Discovery for clinical trials, forgetting some of the other ones that are in there, but they're all network. They sell to non-provider organizations and say, we can help you integrate with our provider base more seamlessly using these products. And Epic Payer Platform is certainly the buzziest, most well-known of those. But Aura being for labs and medical device companies, Supplies on Time being for medical device manufacturers. All of those are network-based products that have the dual strategic purpose of giving them sales distribution to a new customer type. And then using from there, they can sell systems of record to those customer types potentially. Tapestry for payers, ERP to supply manufacturers, hypothetically, Willow Ambulatory to pharmacies. And so it was visually lumped with those products, which is suggestive of the network product. And then from some late, fairly hungover discussion with the team there, they mentioned it being some network-based product for specialty medication workflows.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I mean, Epic's everywhere all the time. What are they not, getting into at this point?
Well, what they're not getting into is avoiding lawsuits, which was another the rule of conferences held true. And so, last week we did some spelunking through TikTok and found this interesting beef tallow influencer that was talked about medical record release. And we're like, what is going on here with this American Association for Disability Justice nonprofit? You and I had talked about it last week with Brad and others. There was just no resolution. Well, now we have more clarity because during the conference, the rule of conference held true, and that group, that nonprofit, launched a new lawsuit alleging antitrust, information blocking, and violation of disability-related laws as claims against Epic in regards to MyChart not having a single login. And so that is how patient portals work generally across most EHRs, right? But suffice to say that there's frustration in the industry, in the disability industry, that helps with these claims to Social Security, that they're still unable to get medical records in a timely fashion. And so that frustration is real. The claims are going to be challenging for the plaintiffs, just because, again, not a lawyer, but looking at them for the antitrust claims, the market definition, they state a 40% market share, which is typically quite low for antitrust claims, and don't properly assert, in my mind, some of the implications that are necessary. But we'll see. For information blocking in particular, when we've seen successful information blocking claims, they've used what you might call state tort hooks, where they're not saying, oh, this is the law, information blocking law was broken, I could sue you, because that would entail the private right of action to be detailed by Congress. Instead, they say, well, because you broke information blocking federal law, you've broken state tort law, unfair competition law, things like that. You're actually suing under breaking California's unfair competition law or something of that nature. That's not what they do here. They just say, you broke information blocking law. This is a claim against you. And I think that'll be challenging given the lack of private right of action. I imagine Epic will push back there. And so, yeah, it's an interesting case, and it just shows that there's still many, many problems to be solved in terms of interoperability, and where we need ubiquitous digital exchange in a frictionless pattern as possible to help disabled people, get their Social Security benefits, to help all the other underserved use cases that currently people are trying to funnel through the treatment purpose of use.
It's a really interesting space. And, you said you're not a lawyer. I'm even further away from legal understanding on that spectrum. You bring up the term torts, and I get a little hungry because I think of tortas. But I think so. I read your article covering this. Obviously, they make a lot of claims, and I agree that there is well-founded frustration when it comes to the fragmentation of this information, the inability to be able to easily get this when trying to make a disability claim. Brought up that the patient portal side access, or not having just one login to my chart, which I think actually Epic is working on something like that to help with, accessing all of your my charts, no matter which Epic specific health system you're at. But I was just curious here, with that fragmentation is not due to Epic, and I think we understand that pretty well. There's obviously multiple Epic and non-Epic health systems. We don't have a federally mandated one record to rule them all within the country. So I think a lot of that is not Epic's issue, and it's certainly not an only Epic issue. And so I don't know if this is a case of, going after the biggest player in the space because it's a problem all the way down. But I'm just trying to understand here, really, is Epic responsible? And if they are, then I feel like all the EHRs are responsible. I'm just kind of confused about how this would play out.
Well, a couple of thoughts here. One is intuition, the way we intuit what is right or wrong, ethics, things like that. Those are all different. The law may be a full Venn diagram overlap, our intuition and the law. It may be a zero Venn diagram overlap.
Sure.
And so we'll talk more about intuition. I gave some non-lawyer legal opinions or perspectives of what might happen based on analysis of those claims. But you're right? Like the architecture of Epic and Cerner and many of these others is that they're sold to hospitals, they're sold to institutions, and those institutions want the agency to own and control and set up the software that they use. And part of that is their patient portal, which they brand and they configure and they make changes to. And so that historical baggage has been true. The lawsuit mentions using TEFCA individual access services, and when doing so, being unable to retrieve data from the Epic sites because of portal credentials. And that is a current function of how Epic has architected their individual access services that other EHRs participating today have not. To your point, Epic has announced, and they have on their TEFCA website, that by the end of the year, they're going to have MyChart Central, and more single unified login, as well as the CMS aligned networks under the CMS health tech ecosystem, pushing Epic and other EHRs to go further and easing authentication and removing that double authentication step. But Epic's choices here are not, by and large, them saying top down, this is what it'll be to their health systems, but these health systems have strong privacy considerations that they're thinking about. And there were rumors, I've yet to find this online, but there were rumors that there's actually another class action lawsuit against Epic and hospitals in some state courts claiming that you've released inappropriately PHI, and that's in violation of HIPAA. And so thus patients suing Epic and or hospitals for HIPAA breach. So, that's that risk is what underpins, or at least stated to underpin, a lot of the behaviors of the health systems and of Epic to serve those health systems. And so it's an interesting testy time, and we'll see where this claim goes. If there's any positive for the plaintiffs, the jurisdiction, West Texas, so I think it's Austin, where that locus of that is pretty favorable to sort of not progressive, but pushing the limits on some tech forward lawsuits. I think that was a strategic choice to file there.
Definitely. So you mentioned, and it's very related, you mentioned IAS within their individual access services. I think like the end goal that we'd love to see, and we understand the technical logistics of how difficult this might be, something like an application on your phone where you're able to see these entities have my health data, and you have levers that control that access, can transfer access, those types of things. We're a long way away from there. I was just curious, you went over kind of the announcements with HIMSS. Anything to report in terms of the health tech ecosystem and some of the main initiatives, which included patient access and Kill the Clipboard?
There are awesome demos, right, by our participants in terms of eClinical works, and either for their Helo product or maybe just their EHR alongside other parties, showing that Kill the Clipboard exchange. A lot of interest and discussion of digital identity, Clear and ID.me as the two main credential service providers, but potentially more entering and certifying in order to serve the TEFCA individual access services and CMS aligned network ecosystems. And then we had Clover Health join last week as a payer, the first payer to really participate in health information networks, and that they're just responding to start to individual access services, but then treatment in some short orders once they ascertain that the treatment queries can actually store fire explanation of benefit bundles. That's a new payload type that if they just throw it over the wall, probably some EHRs and other queries will bomb out. So really cool leadership by Clover in doing this. But man, that post really cooked on LinkedIn because the Wall Street Bets community, they love Clover Health, and so as a public stock. And so anytime you put Clover Health, they're like, "Have you read my analysis of X, Y, and Z?" And I'm like, "Buddy, sir, this is a Wendy's."
They want Clover to go to the moon.
When the CMS RFI request for information last summer, was going through the comments. I like to read the comments because I'm a dork, and as you see over and over again, in this broad, expansive, like what should the CMS do in terms of tech? What should the STP do in terms of tech in this administration? Was sort of the thrust of that RFI. And there's just comment after comment that's like, well, they should just buy and mandate Clover Health. And I'm like, what's going on here? And talked to some people over at Clover, and they're like, oh no, it's Wall Street Bets from Reddit. And so then went to Reddit and found a thread where somebody's like, hey, there's this new question from the CMS that we got to go, like that they're looking for a tech solution. So we got to go hype Clover Health because then they'll go buy Clover Health. It's like, and so you have 20, 30, 40 comments of this nature in this comment campaign. And so I posted about it, and then I've never received like more death threats than from the community saying, you don't understand the magic and the power. And I'm like, I do. I know them very well from working with them over the years, and I'm friendly with them. And so every regulatory, HTI-5, CMS RFI, you always get some interesting, unexpected comment campaigns. But that was one where I'm like, man, that's an intersect I was not expecting to have the SPAC crowd from Chamath's world come on over and get involved in a CMS RFI.
the wonderful and horrifying discourse of the greater internet there.
Anytime you add anonymity of any kind to social media, you start to get some really interesting outcomes. But
Very true.
so yeah, that's the rabbit hole I guess we go down from HIMSS. But you weren't at HIMSS. Maybe you want to tell the audience a little bit about what you worked on, because I sure thought that was interesting.
Yeah, well, it definitely was an interesting week, busy week. One of the main highlights actually was Monday night. Joe Mercado from Arcadia and Care Journey invited me to speak with his class at Johns Hopkins, which is a School of Medicine class that has a mixture of grad students who are in public health and different areas, but it was a class on fire. Basically, it was a Q&A for about an hour and 15 minutes, and it was just great to see about 15 students and their different perspectives that they came in with. The questions that they asked were very interesting to just see what they're curious about. It was a joy to be there. But really, I think a lot of the things we talked about, coming from him were top of their mind. They wanted to understand trends over time in the interop space. And we kind of talked about how the record exchange then turned into data usage. They brought up wearable technology, and not like blood pressure cuffs or pulse oximeters or things like that, but they're very interested in smartwatches. There was a cardiologist there, and she would like to understand how to get the data from a smartwatch to help with their practice. And there, I think there's a thread that could be connected to the AI side that we were talking about, where there's a signal to noise problem where, yes, a cardiologist may be interested in trending over time of what your heart rate looks like or within a particular stress event. But if you include every single moment of your life within that smartwatch's data and you send that into a chart, the provider is going to be overwhelmed. And there's that signal to noise ratio. They're not going to know what to do. Very similar when it comes to AI usage and prompting and things like that. If you have bad data, if you have too much that you're not able to properly classify, sort through, search through, it doesn't matter if you have all the data in the world. It needs to be usable.
That's one part of it. But like a lot of times when I'm looking at dysfunctions in healthcare, and particularly in US healthcare, you look and you squint and you peel it back and you peel it back. Malpractice risk is generally is like one of those big ones that if you start to peel back, like why are they so cagey about what they said back to me or whatever. So many times that behavior, it comes from the risk of malpractice, and certainly dumping a bunch of cardiology data into a chart, has some risk of like they don't read it in time, something happens, and there's a lawsuit. Is common trope for that workflow that I've heard of why we don't want all the RPM data back in the chart. And I, as a technologist, I'm like, we can have AI summarization, we can have alerting. Like there's ways to solve for it versus the sort of Luddite, like just don't even give it to me. Healthcare organizations should be data hungry to better care and have broader insights. And if the problem is the volume of it, well, let's build the tools to distill it down appropriately, is my technologist view on it.
But I've never really thought of that point around malpractice, where you're right. If and there's so much auditing that's available in the chart specifically for this, but the more data they're presented, the more they're theoretically responsible for. And so the higher risk. And so that's really interesting, where we keep claiming we want more and more data. And then how does that play into when, they didn't see the source data, they only saw the AI summary and things like that. That's a fascinating thread to pull on that I really hadn't thought about before now. I have a lot of family that's in medicine. My wife's a nurse, but I have a aunt and uncle who are like a real power couple. That my uncle's an ophthalmologist and my aunt's a electrocardiophysiologist. And I love talking to them at family gatherings because I'm the one working in health IT. She has a practice where she uses a few different EHRs and is needing to chart constantly. And we know about the pajama time and things like that. And then my uncle, who's in ophthalmology, stayed away from it for as long as possible. And they were a specialty that was able to stay on paper. And basically until very recently, he purposely owned his practice and said, I don't want to deal with this because I see my wife, every weekend charting, and basically ignorance is bliss when it comes to that. And so, yeah, that plays a big role too. I think like he was narrowing his scope of responsibility also. And I think it was more the burden aspect that he was trying to stay away from. But that's such a good point. Can a provider be held responsible to all this data that's thrown at them? And we need to make tools that make that easier to distinguish, but I really hadn't thought about that before.
Just everything is about lawsuits in America if you actually think about it too much. And so like even the HTI-5, I forget if we talked about it on a previous episode, but HTI-5 comments, the comment campaign for HTI-5 were by just a big law firm push. So all these law firms said, wait a minute, you're removing certification criteria for auditability, right? Like that when somebody types in the note, that it's immutably stored that something was written, because if later something happens and there's a malpractice lawsuit, if they can go back and edit that note to make it look like they were right, they could fudge things to get around it. And so when the ASTP said, let's get rid of auditability, all these law firms who deal with that are like, no. Like, this is the one good criteria, in a very selfish way for their own businesses, but in a way that there's poignant stories that some of these letters had about what they've seen, the realities of what they've seen, shady doctors do. And so lawsuits as far as the eye can see.
Yeah, that's probably a good way to sum it up. I mean, that must cover it for the week, right?
Well, so
that wasn't a lead in at all.
One more lawsuit. And so, just this morning, we saw a very unexpected development in the Epic versus Health Gorilla case. And so in January, following the rule of conferences at JPM, we saw Epic sue Health Gorilla and a number of co-defendants alleging that there was this fraud. And Epic was joined by Reed Health and Trinity Health and a number of health systems that stating that, these groups were using the health information networks to pull data, claiming treatment, but really for mass tort purposes, for identification of mass plaintiff lawsuits, for PFA exposure and things of that nature. And so we saw motions to dismiss a few weeks ago from Health Gorilla, from Revillamed, some of the defendants that were, I thought, quite well done and articulate in the procedural angle of it all, of saying, hey, there is a process within TEFCA and care quality to resolve these things that should be followed. And the only exception to that process is for preliminary injunction, for, if you are getting injunctive relief. If you need to move so fast to get relief, then you can go around the internal processes to these trust networks. And there was no preliminary injunction filed in the court case as far as we could see. And so it's like, all right, maybe Health Gorilla and Revillamed have a point here. But a few of the other defendants were quite quiet. And now we know why at least one of them was, as this guard dog telehealth has a stipulated agreement now that they've settled with Epic by admitting to a number of things they've done wrong and potentially their counterparties as defendants have done wrong. What they say doesn't mean that it is truth. That needs to be proven in the court of law, but it is not great for the other defendants that they now have this on the record from Guard Dog. And so that changes the dynamic of the case, because it really favors Epic, obviously. It now allows them to potentially pick off other defendants and pit them against one another, particularly Unit 387 is directly allegations in this document named by Guard Dog. And there's a preliminary injunctive element to this agreement that now may satisfy some of the procedural things. And so a fairly deft update by Epic that changes the contours of this case quite a bit and just puts a pin on a very wild HIMSS week.
Definitely. A lot going on. It's such a weird one for me personally, because there's got to be a very small crowd that has past employment history at both Epic and Health Gorilla, and I am one of those. There's got to be more of a Venn diagram than just myself, but I am in that. So it's difficult to comment on publicly, but it seems like Guard Dog coming out with this, the more kind of procedural backed reply that Health Gorilla was bringing up last week, what you said, it does have some validity in terms of how TEFCA and the processes were supposed to work. Seems like that doesn't help them, right? Like that's going to be tough for them now because Guard Dog's basically pushing this forward, right?
I think that the next update we'll see the hearing on the motion to dismiss is in April. And so that will be the big one. There might be some other briefs and stuff in the interim, but yeah, fascinating to see what counter move Quinn Emanuel, who represents Health Gorilla, might do to this. They could potentially, maybe they could still push on it. Well, that you didn't actually do a preliminary injunction or something in that procedural bent, or fall back to some of their other defenses they had in their motion to dismiss, right? That they, in contrast to the Revilla motion to dismiss, the Health Gorilla and Quinn Emanuel motion to dismiss had a lot of other, more substantive arguments to fall back on. So yeah, we shall see.
We'll see what happens in April, and we'll see if it's a slower week next week. This was Pack.
All right. Yeah, we're rock and roll.